Today I'm going to show you my exact Avata 2 settings to get the best possible image quality out of your drone and make your shots look something like this. So you're actually going to set the video image settings for the Avata 2 through the goggles. So we're going to power on both the drone and then we're going to power on the goggles as well. So let's do that now. Oops, I've just dropped it. When you've got the Avata 2 turned on and the goggles 3 turned on, go ahead and put on the goggles. Now using the 4D toggle at the top of the goggles, we're going to flick it up away from us and it's going to bring up this menu at the bottom. So we'll have all our settings across this bottom part of the screen. So first of all, you're going to make sure that you set your mode to manual. We don't want any auto, we want to lock off all the settings and we want to be able to control them rather than the actual sensor in the drone controlling them. First of all, ISO. Now you want to set this as low as possible. So I always go to 100 ISO. This will give us the least noise in the shadows and the blacks. Next up is the shutter speed, but this value depends on, if we go across, what video quality you're actually filming in. Now I always shoot in 4K 30 FPS, which means that I have a shutter speed of 1/60. So whatever your FPS is, so it's 30 FPS, you want to double that and that will give you a shutter speed of 1/60. So for an example, if I was using 4K 60 like this, I would go over and I would double my shutter speed. So 60 times 2 would be 1/120. So as I say, this one actually depends on what you're going to be filming in. Now for me, it's always 1/60 because I don't really do any slow-mo. And 4K 30 actually gives me the most motion blur and the natural feeling of kind of like flying past low objects, and yeah, as I say, gives me that nice motion blur. So pretty much you'll always find me using 4K 30 and 1/60 shutter speed. So those two kind of parameters are actually, I guess, combined to each other. So it depends which one you're using as to what shutter speed you're actually using. But next up, we're going to be looking at the white balance. Now, something again, I usually always have 5500 Kelvin, but it does depend on your environment. So if you're shooting in sunrise, you're probably going to be wanting a lower value as opposed to filming in the day or filming if it's cloudy. I'll actually put some text on screen which you can probably take a picture of or you can print screen, just so you know kind of like what white balance you should be using dependent on the weather and also the time of day, because as I say, this is pretty important because otherwise it's going to make your, I guess, scene look too orange or it could look too cool. It actually matters more than you probably think, and it's something I change before most of my flights, as I say, given the weather. Now the aspect ratio that I always use is 4:3. So this is basically going to give you a, I guess, if we switch to 16:9, here you can see that the screen is filled a little bit more. Now the reason we use 4:3 is because it gives us more options in post. So as you can see, it's given us more top and bottom data from the sensor, which is basically what we need when we put it into GyroFlow, and basically allow you to reformat your video for either social, so vertical, or horizontal if you're using it for YouTube. So 4:3 just gives you the best of kind of both worlds. And as I say, if you're stabilizing it in post, which I always do in GyroFlow, then you need to set this at 4:3. Now the camera fob, you need to set this at wide. Anything other than wide, then the actual drone itself is not going to record gyro data, which is what we need in post to stabilize it later. Now the auto ISO limit, again, I like to keep this as low as possible to stop the introduction of noise and artifacts in the shadows of my videos. So this is always set to 200. As a general rule of thumb, I probably wouldn't go over 800 if you were actually on a job shooting kind of like a nighttime scene. But yeah, I would always try stick to the lowest values when it comes to ISO. Now recording stabilization, you want this off, because as I say, we're going to do everything in post. It just gives us a lot more flexibility as to how smooth we want our footage. So yeah, make sure that that's off. Next, color. So if I toggle between the two, you'll see that normal is a lot more contrasted. The shadows are crushed and the highlights are a lot obviously darker. If we switch to D-Log M, it's basically DJI's version of a log color profile. Now this drone shoots in 10-bit color, so it's a lot nicer using a log profile. Basically this is just going to give you more dynamic range, so in your shadows and your highlights it's going to basically stretch out the scopes, and in post-production you'll see that we'll obviously pull back some of the shadows and we'll be able to tweak the highlights a lot easier than if we were to shoot in normal. It basically just gives us greater flexibility over color grading and color correction, and yeah, captures more data in those shadows and highlights. So it's definitely a must. Even though you think it might look a little bit washed out when you actually set it, trust me, in the editing software we're going to bring it back to life, and it is literally just a click of a button to do that. Now color display assist is basically, if you don't like obviously flying in that kind of washed out color profile, you can just put that on. So that's just in the goggles itself, that's not actually hard coded onto the SD card that you're filming onto, so it's personal preference, this one. But as I say, that one actually doesn't make a difference on your actual final video. So as I say, that's personal preference. That covers all of the settings that I always use. But if you do have any questions on those settings, be sure to ask me in the comments and I can try help you based on the scenario that you're in or the scenario that you're filming in. I can give you some of my advice to what settings I would probably change, but I would say for 95% of the time I'm using these exact settings. Wow, it definitely gets warm when you've got the goggles on and you've got an office full of lights. But basically, yeah, those are all the settings that I use. Let me know if they're similar to what you use, or if there's anything you would actually change. And one of the lights has died, which is great, so let me go swap that one out. Okay, now that we've got all the perfect settings in the Avata 2, there is one accessory every single drone pilot should be using, and these are ND filters. So I've currently got some from Freewell. I'll leave a link in the description below. These are actually for the 04 Air unit, but with the Avata 2 actually being an 04 Air unit, they also work. So you can either get ND filters for the Avata 2 itself, or you can get 04 Air unit filters, which I've got. Now these come in basically ND8, ND16, ND32 and ND64. Now if you're not sure what ND filters are, they're basically sunglasses for your drone. So as I said, we've just set all manual settings onto the drone. Now basically you've got a fixed shutter speed. Say that we set the shutter speed to 1/60, that physically cannot change. So if it's too bright outside, the camera cannot adjust to the brightness and your image is going to look crazy exposed. Now I'll put an example on screen right now to exactly what ND filters do and how they work. As I say, it's literally, just think of it as sunglasses. It's the easiest way to think about it. And say like we've got ND8, ND16, ND32 and ND64. These are basically the strengths of the ND filters. Now again, I'll leave some tips in the description as to probably what ND filter you should use based on the time of day. But for me, as I say, it's always an ND8 or an ND16. So basically, to clip these onto your Avata 2, make sure that it's actually always turned off, because you do need to be touching the front camera and we don't want to be doing that whilst it's on and messing up with the actual gimbal itself. Okay, so you basically, as I say, just put it on those front two clips and you'll hear a little sound when it's actually fixed onto the front camera. And as you can see, your Avata 2 now has some cool looking sunglasses. So you can go out in the bright sun and not have to worry that your video is going to be overexposed. So that wraps things up for the Avata 2 cinematic settings. I hope you've enjoyed and found it useful. I'm going to be posting a lot more videos on this channel, so be sure to stick around and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.